Happy Tuesday, everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's session where we talk about your product and dev organization. We brought in two guests. We have Simon from Neon, very well-known Swiss scale-up, I would say by now, also former podcast guest. And of course, we also have Nenad, serial entrepreneur and currently co-CEO and CTO at Holycode. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It's great to be here.
Nenad, I want to start with you. You are not only the co-CEO and CTO at Holycode, but you also co-founded Movu. You were CIO at Bexio. And what is sort of obvious is you always work together with Laurent, with your co-founder. So I wonder what has motivated you to stand by Laurent side by side throughout these all crazy endeavors and projects?
Yeah, well, we both really like Simon Sinek and this golden circles. So I think we really match well on this why part. And for us, for both of us, it's very important to have a strong why behind anything we do. And this is quite compatible. What I have to say is like we were somehow lucky to get to know each other, I think, in the right moment, and that we built a really good relationship and we can support and rely on each other. And I think this is really important.
What is the why at Holycode at the moment? Why you do this together?
It's a big why. We actually want to change these bad numbers where still 90% of startups fail. So we want to change that. We want to come closer to 50 so that we actually make more startups more successful. So that's
I like that. Technology is a great enabler to do so. Fantastic.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And
Simon,
Neon also wants to be one of those successful startups because our developers are also contracted by Holycode and we can only recommend.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
And that brings me directly to you, Simon. You co-founded Neon. You've been in the ride for 7 years now. How much has the company grown throughout this time? I'm sure it has been quite a wild ride.
How much has Neon grown? That's a bit of an ambiguous question, and there's many aspects. If you consider the competitive landscape back then, well, in any given Swiss bank, you typically had your payment token. Most people still remember the piece from UBS. Credit Suisse was a thing back then, and there wasn't even CSX. If there was mobile banking, then typically you had two mobile apps. So it's only 7 years ago, but the world has changed a lot since then. On the product side, the company was focused initially really on payments, later card. Now with Neon, you get fully fledged banking and even trading since 18 months. The biggest change, however, is on the teaming side. Back then, we had a couple of full stack engineers, and now we have fully fledged empowered squads, each of them basically doing their own domain. One does banking, one does trading, one does subscription products. And in that sense, a lot of the ownership and the decision power we have actually delegated to our super strong team.
I like that. And you also grew quite impressively in terms of users on that sense as well. I'm not sure the number that you mentioned when we did the podcast together a while back, but you were already focusing on how many customers you serve per employee in Neon employees. And you were very, very efficient back then. I'm sure that also continued to be the case.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure the number is much better by now, just because we have many more clients. For me, client growth isn't growth so much because it's not something, it's not an input, right? It's a result of a good job.
Definitely. So today, guys, we want to talk about growth from a product and development perspective. So Nenad, let's start with you. Let's say we grow very nicely on the revenue side. We have that figured out. I know that's a challenge on its own, but we did a webinar on that a few weeks ago. So revenue is growing. Now we have to think about technology because there we obviously also have to grow if we acquire more customers, etc. So growth-wise, when do you know that it's time to start scaling your dev team?
That's, I think, a little bit of a tricky question, and I think it depends on case to case. But let's say if I can kind of somehow summarize it, I always, during my CTO career, I always try to actually promote that to the management that basically the tech team and technology has to actually follow the growth of the company. So the tech team and technology you have when you're early stage startup, and then when you're Series A, let's say, and after that, it's quite different because you actually also have to take care of different things. So early on, basically, you can actually afford to cut certain corners in order to be fast, when it comes to maybe security or, like the backup strategy, disaster recovery, and so on, like all the stuff that you would have to have later, basically. And I think this is really the key. You need to recognize when your organization is moving forward, when your company is moving forward, that you have to act accordingly. So, and this can be very different for different cases. So if you are, let's say, case of Neon, as soon as you get into like really close communications with the banks, or you have to get FINMA certificates and stuff like that, you obviously have to apply certain things, right? So, and I think this is really the key, to actually recognize when is the right moment to move. And I think what people also kind of don't focus that much on is really the technical depth that you build over the time. Because when you are early stage startup, you cut corners, but you need to know that at some point you have to clean those, right? So, and usually you need 25 to 30%, in my experience, 25 to 30% of time every year, development time, to actually clean those things, to do the refactoring and so on. And this is something you need to really kind of fight for sometimes with the business and so on.
I imagine, yeah, been there, done that.
Simon,
what happens if you try to scale the technology too early? Like, is that a bad thing per se? Because with sales, we know it is, but also with technology.
From my angle, yes, it's scaling the dev team and the tech stack too early can absolutely be a bad thing. On the tech stack, it's more obvious. If you have a complicated tech stack, somebody needs to do maintenance. Introducing a message queue is easy. Maintaining it and having it run in a reliable way, that's a different beast. So you really only want the tech stack that you absolutely need and that you get benefits from. On the developer team, it's a bit more tricky. I mean, a team that is too big is quite costly, so you really want to think hard about that. And the other downside is if you scale very fast, and it doesn't really matter when you do that, but if you scale very fast, you will lose culture. You will have lots of infighting. The team will form. There's a storming phase. And that means there's going to be a phase when the team is not very efficient. So from my angle, scaling in a very consistent growth way is much better than scaling fast at any point in time.
Does that mean that ideally you would also scale the tech team sort of as a function of the revenue growth that you experience, for example, or customer growth?
That would be a very conservative way. I'd rather say it's a function of the product and innovation appetite of the company. So you can absolutely be ahead of the curve. It just needs to be aligned with business.
Makes sense. And Nenad, now we talked about scaling up too early. What about scaling up too late, ramping up the tech and the dev stack too late?
Well, I also seen that, as you said, in the past. So I think the big risk is there that you are not ready on time, and that you have a constant pressure from the business, which is directly applying to your team or to your engineers. And you can actually risk of burning some people, right? Because they are constantly underwater. You cannot reach the goals. You're not ready on time. There is a pressure from the business and obviously from the C-level. So I think this can be very tricky, and it's really like exhausting for people. So I think this is something you should really try to avoid and be proactive, as Simon said, to try to be ahead of the curve, but also not just scaling crazy fast, and then suddenly you have a lot of engineers and everything is a nail. You just hit the nails, right? So this is not the goal.
Also makes a lot of sense. So now let's talk about scaling, Simon. When you do scale up, you have a lot of different options. You can hire a dev team internally and recruit them and maybe have them in your offices. You can nearshore or even offshore. What is sort of the best way? What are the pros and cons of these different options that you have?
Mm-hmm. So should we nearshore, offshore, or have the dev team in-house? And we did all of this in the history of Neon. And now we are in a nearshoring mode. And from my angle, that works best. Let me briefly explain why. If you have the dev team in-house, there's two things happening. The first is, obviously, everybody knows that in Switzerland, it's extremely costly you get roughly 2 to 3 engineers in a nearshoring location for one engineer in Zurich or Switzerland. And actually, it's easier to get them. In Switzerland, good engineers are in very high demand. So you also have to spend a lot of time interviewing and then still not getting a green light from the candidate and so on. The second downside to having the engineers internally is what I call the hey Joe principle. So if the engineers sit in the same office as the product managers and the management, there's a very high risk that somebody walks by and, hey, Tom, could you quickly implement this? Should be done in like 10 minutes. And we all know how that goes. And having the engineers in a separate location absolutely stops this. Now, between offshoring and nearshoring, we have all our engineers in one nearshoring location, and I'm going there every 6 to 8 weeks. I would not go to India every 6 to 8 weeks. And if I did, then I would waste a lot of time. So you really want your engineers somewhere in the same time zone and with a really, really good flight connection.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, well explained. I wonder, Nenad, over to you. If now we look at the market developments, of course, we could hire, we could nearshore, but overall, with also the AI developments taking off in that sense, do we just need less and less engineers to actually build products because we automate more or we use more, AI to actually review code or actually even write code? What is your take on the AI development for the development market?
It's a hot topic nowadays. I always match it somehow with when the first robots for producing cars were invented, and then people thought, wow, we are going to work much less. Now the machines are going to do stuff and we will just, have, let's say, 4 hours working day. But what happened actually is that competition picked up and now they work even more with all these machines, but producing much more, right? So I actually think with AI, something similar is happening. So we are, and AI in general, AI is not like a new Google or new thing that will give you the solution, right? It's your assistant, like a very close assistant that you can approach 24/7. And this assistant is really helping you to challenge your ideas and be more productive and faster, in my opinion. So, and I think this is going to be probably the path going forward. So I think, yes, the engineers will be faster, product teams will be faster, designers will be faster. So we will be able to do much more with less. But I think we will also, as a result, we will do much more things. So we won't reduce hours, right? We will be just producing much more. So, and I think this is really what is going to happen. It's just my feeling so far.
Well, wouldn't that also mean that you get more done with less? That means also you still need teams, but maybe smaller teams in that sense.
That could be, but again, competition is picking up. Like if your competitor has 5 people who are now, let's say, 30% more productive, you won't go with 2-3 people, right? You want to be as competitive, right? And you want to be as fast as your competition, right? So I think this is really the thing that is pushing the world forward with AI.
That's an interesting perspective. I like that. And Simon, you mentioned before the hiring part, right? So no matter whether we are hiring in-house in our office or we are nearshoring or even offshoring, you always need to make a hiring decision one way or the other. So what do you look out for when you actually interview candidates and then decide whether they should be working with you or not?
Mm-hmm. So the top criteria for selecting candidates, there's 2 things that are absolutely essential. The first is cultural fit. Very clearly, if somebody, like if it doesn't sit right, or if you feel like, I don't want to spend 2 hours in a discussion with this guy, then it will not work. So gut feeling is an important factor here. And the second thing every engineer needs to bring to the table is flexibility. So if you are stuck in your own way, or if whatever you come up with is always the best idea, then you will never be in a battle of ideas. And that maybe means that this engineer can develop very fast by himself, but he can never be fast, never be effective in a fast team. So that's a no-go. Now, for senior engineers, I look for someone who has domain knowledge and who has done it and really knows his tools. Whereas for a junior hire, I basically hire for brains. I don't need that much experience because these people will learn anyways. But the smarter you are, the faster you will pick it up.
How does your sort of interview process look like? Do you have like different stages, or do you give them a challenge to solve, or how do you then make your decision? What is sort of the process until you reach a final decision in that sense?
We have an initial interview also together with Holycode to do an initial screening and also to sort of create interest from the candidate in Neon. If the interest is sufficient, then they will do a coding challenge, which we review, and for candidates with a good result, we will then do the technical interview with 2 senior engineers from our side. And after that, there's an interview with myself, but that's mostly selling and a bit language check, culture check.
It sounds like a pretty fast process. So that's probably done in 1.5 to 2 weeks, I assume, or even faster.
Sometimes yes, sometimes it takes a bit longer, in particular when we have more candidates to choose from, and then we need to adapt to their timetable if we really want the best one.
Right. And Nenad, Simon just mentioned the importance of culture fit. Often we hear people saying, yeah, hire for culture fit, but skills are also important, but way less important. And for you with Holycode, you sort of hire also with and for your clients in that sense, right? So you have different cultures. You have the Holycode culture and the client's culture, in that case, Neon's culture. How do you bring them together, and what role do skills play in the end versus the pure culture decision?
Well, I really believe, as Simon said, I really believe that culture is really for me, one of the most important, maybe even the most important factors. And there, you're right. There are like 2 cultures, like Holycode and the client's culture, of course. But we worked together for a long time, and we kind of learned each other's. Let's say, if you can learn the culture, we learned each other's culture, and we know approximately what is expected and what we want to actually build within the Holycode. And you can, I always believe you can teach people certain skills with certain efforts, but it's very difficult to change someone's character and to change the culture he's used to. And we saw that. I mean, it's not that they didn't try. I tried hard with few people, it didn't work, and I burned my fingers many times. So because this one person can really destroy the whole team, and then it takes a long time, even after this person leaves, that you fix the issues within the team, right? Because there are still then there are things developed over the time, right? And yeah, I really believe culture is very important, but sometimes you need to. It happened to me a few times that I just needed skills quite fast, and we had to put the culture a little bit on the side. But that was rather like short or mid-term, let's say. It was never like built for the future, because as we said, one rotten apple can destroy the whole pot, right? So this is something you should watch out.
And I feel often we all hear that, right, as founders as well. And then you sometimes just have to experience it yourself until you really get that, yeah, this is the case.
Exactly.
As hard as it is. Yeah.
I would like to add one thing. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'd like to add that I did say culture is important, but to be very clear, for me, culture is a bit like brushing your teeth. So there needs to be culture fit, but you will not hire anybody just because he can brush his teeth in a very nice way.
Very well said. Yeah.
Nice comparison. So now we talked about the hiring and the setup. Now I also want to go into the process itself, because that's also very interesting, and things change a lot from a few co-founders, coding around and hacking things together to get the first revenue in. Let's say we now have a team of 10 developers, Simon. How do I sort of make them work together? How do I split the tasks? How do I make that we still get a good output out of this 10 people development team?
So each developer will work very intensely with the product manager, the CTO, and also with all the other developers. So if you have a team of 10 and it's a single team, then each developer needs to be able to have a relation with about 11, 12 people. That is too much. So you really want to split a team of 10 already in typically 2 teams of 5. And then you have a small fraction of the working relationships. And then in that team, it really depends on the skills. Can be you have a machine learning engineer, a front end, a back end. Can be you have a lot of full stack engineers. It really depends. And you will typically create tickets, so user stories, subtasks, and then the engineers can pull them. depending on their capabilities. So this should be then self-organized.
Fantastic. And the bigger picture is you always have a CTO and also a product owner in that sense to work together with the engineers.
Yes, absolutely.
And tell us also a bit more about the process. Then you pull the tickets. You then probably work in sprints, I assume. What's the process there to prioritize and to make sure that you actually focus on the right things?
Mm-hmm. Focusing on the right things is one of the most important jobs in any startup. So this is very core to us. So we have a product manager team. They come up with a bunch of ideas, and then in the management, together with the product team, we decide what's the priority per squad. So we have basically 3 different roadmaps because we have 3 product engineering squads. And once we have agreed on a priority for the squad, we then bring it into sequence. We balance the small stuff, like what Nenad said initially, fixing tech debt, improving our architecture on the one hand side, and then we typically have focus topics or a couple of parallel smaller product topics. That is the job of the squad to optimize the stream of work. If a ticket is selected for development, as we call it, then initially an engineer will code it. Or actually, before that, even there's a session where the whole squad agrees on what are the acceptance criteria, what is really in scope. They can ask all the questions they have. Communication really is key. If there's no agreement on what a ticket is about, then yeah, it's garbage in, garbage out. So this is super important. Now, if the ticket has been groomed and is selected for development, 1 or 2 engineers will code it. Another engineer will do code review for complicated stuff too. And after that, we have a QA phase. And from the code review or the QA phase, it can always go back to development. And when it's done, it will be merged back to our joint code base.
Amazing. And how often do you do these prioritization meetings? Do they happen monthly or quarterly, or what's the rhythm there?
Yeah, very good. We do them quarterly on a high level and ongoing, sort of in the flow of the roadmap.
Got it. And Nenad, now we started talking about the 10 people team. How does that change as you grow the teams? Let's say you have suddenly 20 or even 50 developers that you have to, be productive with. Does that change anything in that setup, or is it the same, just bigger?
Well, you can obviously follow the same principle, and that's something that you usually do, right? So the goal is, as Simon said, that you have autonomous teams that are big enough to have all the capabilities that they need to carry out all the tasks that are given to their domain. But typically what you do, you really split into teams that are between 5 and 7 people, also following, let's say, Scrum principle, for instance, if you follow the sprints. And then what is very important, if you have bigger teams or like more teams, let's say if you have 5 teams or 6 teams, there is something that they call scrumming the scrums. So basically making sure that what your 5 or 6 teams are doing, that this is aligned towards a common goal. So, and that you have some sort of synchronization if one team is depending on another team with certain deliverables, that this works, right? That you actually have these timelines properly set. So I think this becomes more difficult when you have, let's say, 5, 6, 7, or even 10 teams. So this high-level management becomes more important.
And in that sense, management, I like the manager term, not that much in relation to a startup, only when it's called product manager in that sense. So at one point, you need managers to keep everything together. How do you organize that? Like, are there also too many managers where you then sort of almost become a corporate in terms of your structure, and you have like policies and politics and everything?
Well, this can happen, obviously, and I actually prefer the terms leaders or leads over the managers. But if you have the teams that are completely autonomous and can work basically on their own, usually there is some sort of leadership inside. So there is a PO or PM, however you call it. There's maybe a Scrum Master, and these guys together with the engineers, they actually lead the unit. But obviously you need to have on top of that someone who is, let's say, head of product or head of VP engineering, or those guys, they have to work together basically to do this, to have this overarching goal set properly. And I think you should not, let's say, save on these positions, but it's not needed to have like more than it's needed actually. And I think how you can easily set this is, I mean, when we come to this position where we have more teams, we usually kind of go down to the matrix organizations where we have the tech leads or the team leads for technology plus the product leads, obviously. And this is where you can really see how many of them you need, and obviously the overarching as well, one or two, depending on the scope.
Yeah. And along that process, I assume you also use specific tools. What's your go-to tool set? Maybe seeing if you both say the same or if you have different opinions about the tool stack for your dev teams.
So maybe Simon, I give you the chance to start first. You are closer to the engineering today.
So for the process we described, because the tool stack is large depending on the job at hand, but for the process described, it's really Confluence for the ideation phase. It's Jira tickets for the development process. We use Figma again for the prototyping, and then for the IDE, for the development environment, it's the choice of each developer, and actually we have 2-3 different IDEs in place.
Amazing. Anything to add, Nenad?
Yeah, just one thing, because we have part of Holycode group is now Eton Digital, and funny thing is, because I'm leading them now, it's a unit of 70 people, which is dealing with or doing the product development from discovery until delivery, basically. And there I saw something I didn't see for a while. They use Redmine, and this is because they have their own instance and it's hosted on their own, and they could customize it very well. So this, even though it's kind of, let's say, not that advanced tool, lately I actually like working with it. But what I miss is really the Confluence part. So we are combining those two. And obviously Slack email communication is still
Right.
they're always present, plus the different IDs, as Simon said. Some of the engineers, they use plain editors, and I'm a big fan of that. That was in my time very, very much popular, even Vim. But yeah, mostly nowadays it's IDs.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Simon, another question for you. Now we learned more about the development process, about the hiring. So to sum it up, or to really share your experience, what pitfalls should I watch out for when setting up my dev team? What are some of the costly mistakes or things that you would do differently today that you have learned over your 7 years at Neon?
Mm-hmm. What pitfalls to watch out for? I think you can only be so prepared, and there's always going to be some fuck up that you didn't plan for, and that's fine. You need to be able to handle that. Stuff that happened in the first 3-4 years more than once was really fighting between the engineers. It was about competence, who's the better coder, and everybody is the best coder, as we all know. So this is really something to have clear boundaries between, for example, front end and back end, and to have the leads, give them the autonomy to be the leads, hire for culture, and also explain to people, hey, at Neon, it's not about who can shout the loudest. So that was really something that held us back a bit in the first years. Also, we had one incident where one team lead fell in love and was in a relationship with one of the engineers in his team. And that is not something you can plan for. And I think it's also not something you can fully avoid. But yeah, so both left in the end. And I hope we handled it somewhat gracefully.
Yeah, that's a challenging situation. It's something you would definitely not plan for or expect in that sense. Nenad, on your side, when we zoom out a bit, you mentioned the importance of the alignment, and also to wrap up a bit here before we look into the conclusion and the rapid fires. We often hear about OKRs in terms of setting goals, objectives, and key results. We want to make sure everyone is aligned, etc. To what extent do OKRs also work for a development environment? Is that a good idea, or is that a terrible idea?
I think it's somewhere in between, To be honest, I still did not see it fully functional in any of the tech setups. I saw it more on the high level for the company, where basically together with the management for different departments, you deliver you prepare the OKRs, and then basically to streamline like efforts of all the departments towards the common goal, which works quite well. But in the tech environments, I think this is a little bit tricky because from one side, we are taught to follow some agile methodology where you basically have certain rules. And I believe that not always this is matching the rules of the OKR approach. So the closest thing is really the initiatives, because you can try initiatives, test them quickly, fail, see if it works. But I mean, the having let's say like a waterfall setup for certain things in development, I think this is not that good nowadays. So I really believe more agile setup is the better one.
And that's what you're living at Holycode. We can definitely see and feel that 100%. So to wrap up, I have 2 last questions for you guys before we go into the rapid fires. First, for you, Simon, what is the greatest strength of the Neon dev team?
The greatest strength of the Neon dev team is the ability to do pragmatic decisions. So I can trust my team to build up the right amount of tech debt to deliver really fast and cut the right corners.
Wow, that's a very good position to be in. Well done. I love that.
Also to clean corners later on, don't forget.
Yeah. And for you, Nenad, what has being the CTO at Holycode taught you? I mean, there are plenty of lessons learned to choose from, but if you had to choose 2 or 3 to share with us today?
That's the thing. I was recently talking to someone about this, and actually what I think I learned the most, or if I can summarize it, is that with Holycode we see so many setups with different companies, different products, and so on. And what I really see is that every product, every team, every company has a different needs. So you cannot just simply apply what worked in the other case. You just bring it and you apply one-on-one to the new case. We tried it a few times, and I was really breaking my head. Why is it not working? I mean, I saw that it works on the other side, but it's really like it's down to people, different connections between people, different dynamics. So it really doesn't work always the same. And I think this is what I learned. You cannot apply things the same way to different cases.
It's not a black and white world. It's probably very gray in between.
Exactly.
So guys, to wrap up today, I also have some rapid fire questions for you. I'm going to start with you, Nenad. What is the one tool that you can't live without as a CTO? Just one tool, your most favorite one.
Most favorite, or the one that I mostly need, but I don't like it that much.
Let's say that's also fair.
If I can actually say both. So I really like Confluence. This really helps me to organize my thoughts, my day, my to-dos, and everything. And from another side, what I found really useful, even though I don't like it that much, is the password manager, because there is so many accesses that you need to have, and you somehow need to protect it. So this is like a lifesaver to me.
Nice. Simon, what's the most underrated skill for a tech founder to have?
The ability to hold 2 opposing thoughts, take out your ego and let the team discuss.
Oh, I love that. Well said. Nenad, coffee or tea for your long coding sessions, or something different like Coca-Cola?
Tea. I stopped drinking coffee recently, or not recently, like a few months ago, but I was big on coffee, really, like during my, especially coding sessions. That was... Yeah.
I imagine. Simon, what's the best piece of advice for someone starting in fintech?
Assuming starting as a CTO, then you should really know your domain. Your tech team knows the tech, but you need to infuse the domain knowledge.
Nice. And then what's your favorite programming language right now?
I would still stick to Ruby and Ruby on Rails. That was the technology we built mobile on. But I'm not sure if I would actually use it again, just because of you cannot find easily good engineers. That's the thing.
I see. Yeah, always a challenge. Simon, if you could add one feature or any feature to Neon tomorrow, what would it be?
Mortgages. I think this will become much more attractive as the interest rates go down.
Very interesting. Guys, that was a pleasure having you. A lot of fun and very insightful. Thank you very much for your time today. Simon, Nenad, all the best, and thanks for being here on the show today.
Thanks a lot, Silvan. It was great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I had a blast. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.